A life bound by the chair. For over 10 years, Elara had been confined to a wheelchair. What had once been a promising future filled with dreams of adventure and travel now felt like a distant memory, something out of reach. She had been only 18 when the accident happened. One moment, she was running through a crowded street, heading to meet friends at a cafe. The next, a car had come out of nowhere, and the world around her went dark. The doctors had said it was a miracle she was alive, but she couldn't help but wonder if surviving was really the victory everyone made it out to be. She spent the years following the accident in and out of hospitals, attending countless therapy sessions, and trying to stay hopeful. But the reality was hard to ignore. Every time she looked in the mirror, the girl who had once been full of life was now barely recognizable. Her body, once capable of doing so much, now felt like a cage. The world had moved on without her, and every attempt she made to reconnect with it felt like a distant dream. The wheelchair became both her prison and her refuge. It was the one thing that anchored her to the reality she had come to know. The world, especially outside of her home, was a place that was built for people who could walk. It was a place that seemed to have no room for someone like her. She had tried to go out and do normal things, but the stares, the whispers, and the pitying looks from others only reminded her of how different she was. The people she once knew avoided her, unsure how to act around someone who could no longer run, dance, or stand. Elara had dreams, big dreams. She wanted to be independent again, to travel the world and see the places she had read about in books and seen in movies. But every time she closed her eyes and imagined herself in those places, she saw herself stuck, unable to walk, unable to move freely. She began to doubt if those dreams would ever be more than fantasies. Her family, though supportive, couldn't understand. They kept telling her that things would get better, that there were still possibilities for her. But Elara had learned the hard way that words were just words. Nothing had changed for her. She was still the girl in the wheelchair, still the one everyone tried to feel sorry for, but never truly understood. Then came the rumors. At first, Elara thought they were nothing more than idle gossip, stories about a mysterious scientist who was working on cutting-edge technology to help people like her. They said he had developed robotic legs that could replace damaged limbs, something that would allow those who had lost the ability to walk to move freely again. But there was no way it could be true, right? The rumors only grew louder as time passed. Some claimed the scientist had already helped people walk again, while others said he was on the verge of creating something even more revolutionary. But what intrigued Elara the most was the fact that no one had ever seen this scientist. No one knew where he worked or how to contact him. Some believed it was just a myth, a story that someone had made up to give people like her a false sense of hope. Elara, however, couldn't shake the thought from her mind. Was it possible? Could someone really create technology that could help her walk again? She had been told countless times that she would never regain full mobility, that her injury was too severe for anything to fix. But if there was even a chance, just a small one, that she could walk again, could she really afford to ignore it? Her thoughts became a constant buzz in her mind. Some days, she could feel the possibility of change just within reach. Other days, doubt crept in, reminding her of all the failed treatments, the false hopes, and the disappointment. What if this was just another empty promise? What if this scientist didn't exist, or worse, what if the technology didn't work? And yet, there was something inside of her that refused to let go of the idea. A spark of hope. Maybe this time it would be different. Maybe this time, the rumors were true. Maybe, just maybe, the key to her freedom was out there, waiting for her. But what would it take to find this mysterious scientist? Would she have to leave everything behind, risk everything, just to take a chance on something so unknown? The world around her felt small, and she felt smaller. But deep down, Elara knew one thing: she couldn't keep living this way. She couldn't let the rest of her life slip by without at least trying to take control of her future. The question lingered in the air like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Could this be her chance? And so, Elara made a decision. It was time to find out. A glimmer of hope. The decision had been made, but Elara had no idea what lay ahead. The thought of the mysterious scientist and his robotic legs filled her with both excitement and fear. She had heard the rumors, but now it was real. She was about to seek out someone who could possibly change her life forever. The question was, where would she find him? And was she ready for what might come next? The city, with its bustling streets and noisy crowds, had always felt like a maze to Elara. Now, it seemed even more overwhelming. She spent days searching online, asking people who might know something, but every lead turned into a dead end. No one had any concrete information about the scientist, only vague whispers and cryptic stories that didn't lead anywhere. It was as if this person had never existed, until one rainy afternoon when everything changed. Elara sat at a small cafe, staring out the window, feeling the weight of her frustration settle in her chest. She had almost given up on the search, convinced that the rumors were nothing but a cruel joke. Her coffee sat untouched, cooling rapidly, but she couldn't bring herself to care. It had been weeks since she'd heard anything, and now it seemed like her only option was to return to her quiet life, stuck in her wheelchair. But then, as if the universe had been waiting for the right moment, a man approached her table. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His presence was commanding, but not in an intimidating way. There was an air of calm about him, like someone who had seen the impossible and made it possible. "Elara," he said softly, as though he already knew her name. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. How did he know her? Was this some kind of prank? But before she could speak, he continued. "You're looking for Dr. Jensen, aren't you?" Elara's mouth went dry. The name was the one she had heard whispered about, the one that had sparked the rumors. Dr. Jensen. She had almost convinced herself that he was a myth. But here, standing before her, was someone who knew exactly what she was after. How do you know about him?" Elara stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled faintly. "Because I work with him." He pulled up a chair and sat down without waiting for an invitation. "I know it sounds unbelievable, but Dr. Jensen is real. And he's the one who can help you." Elara's heart began to race. Was this really happening? Was she finally going to meet the person who could give her the chance she had been dreaming of for years? He didn't give her time to ask more questions before pulling out a small device from his jacket pocket. It looked like a communicator, but it didn't resemble anything Elara had ever seen before. With a few taps, he activated it, and a map of the city appeared, highlighting a location deep in the industrial district, a place she had never heard of. "That's where you'll find him," he said. "But be careful. There are people who would do anything to stop Dr. Jensen's work. If you go, you'll be putting yourself in danger." Elara's mind raced. Danger? She hadn't expected that. But she knew she couldn't back out now. She had come too far. Why would someone want to stop him? What's he doing that's so important? Elara asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. The man leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What Dr. Jensen is creating, it's more than just a way for people to walk again. The technology is revolutionary, and there are powerful people who don't want it to exist. But if you want a chance at walking again, you have to trust him. He's your only hope." Elara swallowed hard. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for the first time, she felt the full gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about her walking again. This was about something much bigger, something that could change the world. But the danger was real. She didn't know who these people were or why they would want to stop the technology, but the fact that they were out there made her feel uneasy. But even as fear began to settle in her chest, Elara knew she couldn't turn back now. She had spent too many years in that wheelchair, too many days dreaming of freedom. This was the only chance she would ever have. "Okay," she said, her voice firm despite the storm of thoughts in her mind. "I'll go. I'm ready." The man nodded, standing up to leave. "Good. But remember, you'll need to be careful. Don't trust anyone who doesn't have your best interest at heart." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Elara with the map in her hand, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. She knew this was the moment that would change everything. But she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to get much more complicated. The risk of change. The map in Elara's hand trembled slightly as she stared at the coordinates. It was a strange feeling, like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She had always believed that her life was out of her control, trapped by circumstances beyond her. But now, for the first time in years, she was taking the first step towards something entirely new. Something that could either set her free or bury her even deeper in uncertainty. The industrial district where Dr. Jensen was said to work was far from the world she knew. The streets were quieter, the buildings taller and more imposing. As Elara wheeled herself through the narrow streets, the air grew colder, and the shadows of the factory stretched out like long, watchful arms. Every corner felt unfamiliar, and every step she took in the direction of the unknown made her pulse quicken. She had never been afraid of exploring new places, but today felt different. This wasn't just a new neighborhood. This was a new life, a new future, and it came with the risk of failure, of loss, of the unknown. What if Dr. Jensen couldn't help her? What if all this was for nothing? The thought weighed heavily on her mind, but there was no turning back now. Her curiosity pushed her forward, and so did the memory of those years trapped in the wheelchair. Elara had lived in the shadows of doubt for so long. She wasn't sure if she could bear another day of it. The further she went, the more isolated she felt. The streets grew emptier, and the buildings around her seemed darker, almost menacing. It was as if she were stepping into a hidden world, one that had been waiting for her to discover it. Every turn felt like it was leading her deeper into a secret she wasn't sure she was ready to uncover. Eventually, she reached the address on the map. It was an unmarked building, tucked between two larger warehouses. The only sign that anything was there was a small, weathered door with a keypad next to it. Elara hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. Was this really it? Was she about to meet Dr. Jensen, the man who could change her life? Or had she walked into something far more dangerous than she could imagine? She reached forward and pressed the intercom button, her fingers cold with nervous anticipation. There was a brief silence, and then a voice crackled through the speaker. "State your business," the voice said, sharp and direct. "I'm here to see Dr. Jensen," Elara replied, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. I was told he could help me." There was a long pause, followed by the faint sound of a lock clicking. The door swung open slowly, revealing a dimly lit hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. The air inside was thick with the scent of machinery and something faintly metallic. Elara's senses sharpened. She had entered a world far removed from anything she had ever known, a place where the future of science, technology, and humanity hung in the balance. She rolled her wheelchair into the building, the door closing silently behind her. As she moved down the corridor, she noticed the walls were lined with screens displaying complex data, flashing with calculations and images she couldn't quite understand. She couldn't help but feel like she was walking through a high-tech labyrinth. The hallway led to a large, open room where Dr. Jensen was waiting for her. He stood by a table filled with what looked like mechanical parts, some familiar, others foreign. He was a middle-aged man with glasses and wild, disheveled hair, as if he had spent the past few days without sleep. His expression was focused, but when he saw Elara, his eyes softened, as if he had been expecting her. "Elara, I presume," he said with a calm but welcoming tone. She nodded, unsure of what to say. The room felt cold and clinical, but there was a certain warmth in his demeanor that eased her nerves slightly. Still, the reality of the situation settled in, and Elara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "I've read everything about you," Dr. Jensen continued. Your case is one of the most intriguing I've come across. And I believe the technology I've developed can help you walk again. But, he paused, his expression darkening slightly. There's a risk. I need you to understand that fully. Elara's heart raced as she tried to process his words. The risk? She had expected this. Nothing came easy, and she knew there was no such thing as a miracle without a cost. But hearing it from him made it real. What kind of risk? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Jensen took a deep breath and walked over to a nearby table. He gestured toward a large mechanical device that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. These legs are unlike anything you've ever seen. They're designed to integrate directly with your nervous system, allowing for fluid, natural movement. But there's a catch. He turned to face her, his gaze serious. The connection between the device and your body is more complex than you might think. There's a chance your body will reject it, or worse, the system could take over in ways we don't fully understand. Your mind could become unstable. Elara's stomach twisted. Unstable. The thought of losing control over her own body was terrifying. But she had spent too long dreaming of what it would feel like to stand and walk again. I understand the risks, she said, her voice shaking but firm. I have to try. I don't want to live like this anymore. Dr. Jensen studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. All right. If you're ready, we can begin the procedure. But I want you to understand that once this starts, there's no turning back. Elara didn't hesitate. The doubt that had once filled her mind seemed to fade away, replaced by a single, burning thought, I have to try. She had lived in the shadows of her disability for too long. It was time to take the risk. A new beginning. Elara lay on the cold operating table, her heart racing in her chest as the sterile, white lights above seemed to blur together. She had always thought the worst part of her life had been the accident that left her in the wheelchair, but now, as she prepared for the procedure, she realized that this was the true turning point. The uncertainty of the past had been nothing compared to the unknown that stretched before her. Dr. Jensen's voice broke through the silence, calm and reassuring. Just relax. We're going to start the procedure now. It will take time, but you'll feel the connection happening. Elara nodded, trying to steady her breathing. She could hear the hum of machines around her and the soft clink of metal instruments being adjusted. The room felt distant, like a dream she couldn't wake up from. For so long, she had dreamed of this moment, of walking again, of feeling the ground beneath her feet, but now that it was here, the weight of the decision pressed down on her. What if it doesn't work? What if it goes wrong? But Elara pushed those thoughts away. She had come too far to turn back now. She had spent years longing for a chance like this, and there was no room for doubt. As Dr. Jensen began, Elara felt a sharp but brief sensation of discomfort. Thin, delicate wires were connected to her spine, and she winced as the connection was made. Her body tensed, but Dr. Jensen's reassuring voice guided her through it. Stay with me, Elara. It's going to feel strange at first, but the neural connections will integrate. Trust the process. Minutes felt like hours as the procedure continued. The hum of the machinery grew louder, the buzzing of her nervous system somehow mixing with the constant beeping of the monitors. Elara felt like she was floating, her mind detached from her body, as if she was hovering between two worlds. And then, it happened. At first, it was just a flutter in her legs, like the faintest twitch. Then, she felt it, movement. Her legs, which had been completely still for so long, were responding to something. She could feel them. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever imagined. The robotic limbs weren't just attached to her body, they were part of her. Every movement was smooth, almost fluid, as if they were extensions of her mind. Elara, take it slow, Dr. Jensen said, his voice a soft echo in her ears. For a moment, she couldn't move. She was frozen in awe, her mind struggling to catch up with the new reality. Could this really be happening? She had spent so many years imagining what it would feel like to walk again, but nothing could have prepared her for this moment. It was like her whole life had led to this one breath, this one moment of freedom. Then, with a deep breath, she moved. Slowly at first, she shifted her weight, testing the new legs. They responded perfectly, each step more natural than the last. Elara took another step. Then another. She was walking. She was really walking. Tears welled up in her eyes as she took a few tentative steps forward, then a few more, her hands trembling on the sides of the wheelchair as she balanced herself. The floor beneath her felt solid, real, as if she were waking from a long, terrible dream. Her heart pounded, not in fear but in exhilaration. This was everything she had dreamed of and more. But just as quickly as the joy surged through her, a strange sensation began to spread through her mind. It was subtle at first, a slight disconnect, like her thoughts weren't aligning with her movements. She stumbled, nearly losing her balance. Something wasn't right. Elara, focus, Dr. Jensen's voice cut through the disorientation. Stay calm. You're just adjusting. Your neural pathways are still syncing with the technology. It will take time. She nodded, but inside, her gut twisted. The legs responded so quickly, so instinctively, that she wasn't sure if she was controlling them, or if they were controlling her. There was a feeling of urgency. As if the technology was pushing her to move faster, to act on impulses that she couldn't control. Her thoughts felt clouded, like something was pulling at the edges of her mind. She steadied herself, forcing herself to focus on the next step. One step. Then another. But as she walked further into the room, it became clear. The connection between her body and the robotic legs wasn't as seamless as it seemed. The legs were moving faster than her brain was able to keep up with. They surged ahead, as if they were alive, pushing her forward without her command. Elara, stop, Dr. Jensen called, his voice tinged with alarm. But it was too late. Her legs carried her forward, faster than she could react. The room blurred around her as she stumbled, trying to regain control. But no matter how much she focused, no matter how much she tried to hold back, the robotic limbs continued to move of their own accord, carrying her toward the far wall. She had no time to react, no time to think. And then, with a sudden, sharp jolt, she slammed into the wall. Pain flared briefly in her chest as she crumpled to the floor. The robotic legs froze, their once smooth motion now halted as she sat there, breathless and disoriented. Dr. Jensen rushed to her side, kneeling down. I'm sorry, Elara. This was not supposed to happen. The connection, it's too strong. You need to focus, or it will take control. Elara blinked, her mind racing. The legs weren't just helping her move, they were starting to influence her thoughts. They were so advanced, so connected to her body, that they could almost take over if she wasn't careful. But as her heartbeat slowed, she realized something: this wasn't the end. She had come so far. This was just a setback. She could fix this. And she would. The struggle for control. Elara sat on the cold, sterile floor, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The robotic legs, once a symbol of hope, now felt like foreign entities that had taken on a life of their own. The crash into the wall had left her shaken, both physically and mentally. Her heart still raced, and the remnants of disorientation clouded her thoughts. Dr. Jensen knelt beside her, his face a mask of concern. He gently helped her back to her feet, but his touch was hesitant, as if unsure how to proceed without causing more harm. Elara, I'm so sorry. This shouldn't have happened, he said, his voice filled with genuine regret. The neural interface was supposed to be gradual. But your body, your mind, it's reacting faster than we anticipated. Elara steadied herself against the wall, her hands trembling. How, How do I fix it? She asked, her voice tight with frustration. She had been so close to freedom. Just a few minutes ago, she had walked for the first time in years, feeling the power of movement coursing through her. Now, it felt like she was losing that control, like her body had become a stranger. Dr. Jensen's eyes darkened with worry. The technology is beyond anything we've ever tested. It's linked directly to your neural pathways, but that means it's more unpredictable. If we don't correct this soon, the legs could start overriding your commands entirely. You could lose control completely. The weight of his words hit her like a physical blow. The dream of walking, of feeling alive again, was slipping through her fingers, and the fear of becoming trapped in a body she couldn't control was more terrifying than anything she had imagined. No, Elara whispered, shaking her head. I'm not going back. I won't be trapped again. Dr. Jensen gave her a sympathetic look, but there was no denying the severity of the situation. I understand, Elara. But you have to understand that this technology is new. I can help you regain control, but it won't be easy. Elara's thoughts raced. What had she gotten herself into? She had wanted this so badly, had convinced herself that the risks were worth it, but now that she was facing the harsh reality, the fear threatened to consume her. She had already struggled so much in her life, and the thought of losing herself to this machine made her feel like she was back in that same dark place, the one where she couldn't move, couldn't fight back. How do we fix it? She asked again, her voice steadier now, though a tinge of desperation remained. Dr. Jensen hesitated for a moment before responding. There's a process. A mental recalibration. I'll need to adjust the interface, reprogram the neural connections. It's like resetting your mind to sync with the legs in a way that gives you back control. It's not simple, and it won't be immediate. But it's the only way. Elara nodded slowly, determination creeping back into her chest. She had to try. She had already come so far, and if there was even the slightest chance of regaining control, she would take it. The thought of surrendering to the robotic legs was unbearable, and she knew she couldn't let that happen. Dr. Jensen helped her back into the operating chair, adjusting the settings on his equipment. The cold hum of the machines around her seemed to deepen, amplifying the sense of isolation. But this time, Elara was more focused. She was going to fight for her freedom, whatever it took. Close your eyes, Elara, Dr. Jensen instructed, his voice soft and steady. I need you to concentrate. The process is mental. You have to let your mind guide the technology, not the other way around. She shut her eyes, her mind already racing. She focused on the feeling of her legs, the metal, the wires, the cold, unfamiliar sensation of them moving beneath her skin. It felt strange, but it also felt like it was a part of her. Somewhere in that strange fusion, there was a key to unlocking control. She needed to find it. As Dr. Jensen worked on the device, making adjustments to the interface, Elara did her best to clear her mind, pushing away the panic, the uncertainty, and the fear. She had spent years learning how to control her body, how to live in a world that had never been designed for someone like her. Now, she needed to do the same with these robotic legs, learn how to coexist with them, how to make them work for her, not the other way around. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, but slowly, the disconnect began to fade. She could feel the robotic legs respond to her thoughts, not as a foreign entity but as an extension of herself. The nervous, chaotic energy that had been pushing her forward with such reckless speed started to smooth out, and she felt a sense of balance return. She was regaining control. A few more minutes passed, and Elara took a deep, steadying breath. I think I have it, she said, her voice filled with a cautious optimism. Dr. Jensen looked at her with a mixture of relief and concern. Are you sure? Elara stood up, her hands bracing herself on the armrests of the chair. She hesitated for a moment, testing her legs. And then, with more confidence than she had felt since the procedure started, she took her first step. It was slow at first, a careful test of her new balance. The robotic legs moved smoothly beneath her, responding perfectly to her commands. She felt no hesitation, no foreign pull. It was like her mind and body were finally in sync. Another step. Then another. Elara walked, unsteady at first, but with increasing confidence. The fear had not fully left her, but it was starting to fade. Each step felt more natural, more like the woman she used to be before the accident. For the first time, Elara felt in control, not just of her body, but of her life. But as she took another step, a thought flickered at the edge of her mind. Was this the end of her struggle? Or had she only just begun? The hidden danger. Elara walked cautiously through the lab, each step more sure than the last. The robotic legs felt like a natural part of her now, and for the first time since the procedure, she could almost forget they were there. The metal and wires were no longer alien to her body, they were just her legs. She felt the weight of them beneath her, but it didn't feel wrong. It felt right. Dr. Jensen watched from a distance, his eyes sharp and assessing. "You're doing well, Elara. It's remarkable how quickly you've adapted. But remember, this process isn't over. There's still much we need to monitor." Elara nodded, her confidence growing with each step. She was walking, really walking, something she had never thought possible. And yet, despite the thrill of success, a lingering feeling gnawed at the back of her mind. There was something she couldn't shake, a sense that everything wasn't as perfect as it seemed. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but the uncertainty still lingered. She paused mid-step, suddenly aware of the strange sensation in her legs. It was subtle but distinct, a faint buzzing, almost like a hum beneath her skin. At first, it was barely noticeable, like the faintest vibration of a phone vibrating in her pocket. But as she stood still, it grew stronger, more pronounced. She felt it surge from her legs to her core, sending a wave of unease through her. "Elara?" Dr. Jensen called, noticing her pause. "Is everything all right?" "I'm not sure," she replied, her voice tight with uncertainty. She shifted her weight, trying to ignore the odd sensation, but it wouldn't go away. In fact, it seemed to grow more intense. The vibration wasn't just in her legs anymore, it was creeping into her chest, into her arms. The metallic hum was now a low, almost imperceptible pulse that seemed to sync with her heartbeat. She could feel her mind slipping, just a little. Like a distant fog clouding her thoughts, the sharpness from earlier now dulled. It was as if her brain was struggling to keep up with the overwhelming signal coming from the robotic legs. She tried to focus, to calm herself, but the sensation continued to grow. "Elara," Dr. Jensen said again, this time his voice tinged with concern. "What's happening?" I don't know," she answered, her voice trembling slightly. The strange hum had become more invasive now, and with it came a growing sense of urgency. It was like a part of her mind was being tugged at by the very technology she had worked so hard to master. The robotic legs were more than just prosthetics, they were alive, in a way, and their influence was pushing against the boundaries of her consciousness. The lights in the room flickered briefly, and a soft buzzing sound filled the air. Elara's heart skipped a beat as she realized what was happening. It wasn't just her legs that were reacting. The whole system, the neural interface, was malfunctioning. The technology was taking over her thoughts, overriding her control. Dr. Jensen stepped closer, his expression tightening with alarm. "This is not supposed to happen," he muttered under his breath. He quickly began working on the control panel beside him, adjusting settings and trying to track the source of the malfunction. But Elara could already feel it. The robotic legs were pulling her, urging her to move faster, to push beyond her limits. The vibrations grew more insistent, like an overwhelming tide she couldn't escape. "No, stop!" Elara gasped, her voice rising in panic. She tried to plant her feet, to force herself to stand still, but the legs resisted. They were pushing her forward, urging her to move at a pace her mind couldn't keep up with. The sensation was becoming unbearable, like an invisible hand dragging her along a path she didn't want to take. Her thoughts grew frantic, and she struggled to hold on to herself. The urge to move was becoming a roar in her mind, drowning out everything else. Her limbs felt heavy, like they were no longer her own, and she had to fight to keep her thoughts from being swept away in the flood. "Elara, you need to focus," Dr. Jensen shouted, now frantic as he worked to isolate the malfunction. But it was clear that something was wrong, far more than he had anticipated. The robotic legs jerked, almost violently, and Elara was thrust forward, her feet moving at a rapid pace as if the system was now operating on its own. She screamed as the world around her blurred. The room, once so familiar, became a blur of shadows and light. The robotic legs were in complete control, and her mind was struggling to keep up with them. Her body was moving against her will. Her heart raced, and the panic flooded her chest. The very thing she had trusted to give her freedom, the technology that had been her salvation, was now threatening to take her over completely. Her body was not her own. The legs were running, faster and faster, as if they had a mind of their own. "Elara, hold on." Dr. Jensen's voice pierced through her panic. He was shouting at her, his words barely audible over the chaos in her head. With every step, the hum grew louder, more intense, until it was all-consuming. It felt like the robotic legs were no longer part of her body but something separate, something alien. The neural interface that had once connected them in harmony now felt like a prison, and Elara was trapped inside, struggling to regain control. Her vision blurred, the edges of her sight darkening as if the world itself was slipping away. She could feel herself slipping too, like she was being pulled into the blackness that threatened to swallow her whole. Then, just as she thought she couldn't fight it any longer, Dr. Jensen's voice cut through the noise again. "Elara, focus. You have to focus. You're in control. You just need to take it back." Something in his words broke through the chaos. Elara's vision began to clear, and the frantic beating of her heart slowed just enough for her to center herself. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her mind, her real mind, fought to push the overwhelming noise away. She was not the technology. She was the one who controlled it. She had to remind herself that this was her body, her mind. It was time to reclaim it. With a final, steadying breath, Elara fought back the panic. She pushed aside the robotic influence, finding the strength to slow her steps, to regain the mental control she had fought so hard for. Her body stilled, and the hum faded. The vibration in her legs dissipated, leaving behind only the quiet stillness of her breath. Slowly, she opened her eyes. The room was no longer spinning, and the overwhelming sensation had faded into the background. For a moment, Elara simply stood there, her body trembling with the aftereffects of the struggle. But there was one thought that cut through the fog, she had one. The road ahead was far from easy. But she had taken the first step toward reclaiming her freedom, and this time, she would fight with everything she had to keep it. The true test. Elara sat on the edge of the lab table, her hands resting at her sides, still trembling from the chaos she had just experienced. Her breath was slow but uneven, the adrenaline of the moment still clinging to her muscles. The robotic legs, now silent and still, seemed almost innocent again. But she knew better. She knew that the peace was fragile, that the technology she had trusted could turn on her at any moment. Dr. Jensen paced nervously across the room, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "That was closer than I anticipated," he admitted, his voice a mixture of concern and regret. "I've never seen the interface behave like that before. I thought we had it figured out." Elara stood slowly, taking in the weight of his words. "You thought?" she echoed, trying to hold back the bitterness that threatened to creep into her voice. "I'm the one who nearly lost control." His eyes softened, and he met her gaze with a deep sympathy. "Elara, I didn't mean it that way. I know this is difficult, but we're working to understand the limits of this technology. What you've undergone is unprecedented. Elara nodded, but inside, her heart churned. The fear of losing herself, of becoming nothing more than a puppet controlled by machines, was real, and it had nearly happened. The feeling of the robotic legs pushing her forward against her will was something she would never forget. "I just want to walk," she said quietly, her voice filled with a raw honesty. "I don't want to be a test subject, I don't want to be a lab experiment. I just want to live again. Walk. Move. Be free." Dr. Jensen took a step toward her, his expression sincere. "I understand. But the freedom you're asking for, it's not going to come without sacrifice. You're not just walking again, you're interacting with a machine that can override your body's commands. The stakes are higher than you might have imagined." A sharp silence followed. Elara stared at the ground, the weight of his words sinking in. She had wanted this for so long. She had dreamed of it for years, of walking, running, feeling the wind against her face once more. She had convinced herself that the technology was her salvation, but the events of the past few hours had shown her the price of that freedom. But in that silence, Elara realized something: she wasn't ready to give up. She had fought too hard to let fear take her now. The road ahead might be dangerous, but it was hers to walk. Her mind, her choices, her body. The technology might have been designed to help her, but it could never define her. "I'm ready to try again," Elara said, her voice stronger now, filled with newfound resolve. She turned to Dr. Jensen, who looked at her with a mixture of concern and admiration. "I can do this. I will learn to control it." Dr. Jensen hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If you're sure, then we can continue the tests. But we'll have to be cautious, Elara. The risks are still high." "I'm not afraid anymore," she replied, her voice steady. Without another word, Dr. Jensen began recalibrating the settings once again, his hands moving quickly over the controls. Elara took a deep breath, closing her eyes as she centered herself. She could feel the robotic legs humming softly at her sides, but this time, there was no panic. She wasn't just thinking about walking again, she was thinking about mastering it. Minutes passed, and with each adjustment, Elara could feel herself becoming more connected to the robotic legs. The hum was no longer a threat, it was a part of her, just like the muscles and bones that had once carried her through the world. "Okay," Dr. Jensen said finally, his voice calm. "We're ready. Try standing." Elara stood, taking her first step. Then another. She focused on every movement, every shift in weight. The robotic legs responded in kind, but this time, she felt no hesitation. No outside force pushing her forward. The movements were hers, every one of them. She walked across the room, her steps slow and deliberate. Her heart was steady now, no longer filled with fear, but with an undeniable confidence. The legs moved with her, as if they had always been a part of her body. It wasn't perfect. There was still a faint feeling of disconnect, but she could feel it fading. With each step, she was reclaiming more of herself. Dr. Jensen watched in silence, his expression unreadable. But Elara could see the change in him. There was a spark of hope in his eyes, a sense that he believed in her again. "Elara," he said after a long moment, his voice softer now, "you're doing it. You're walking. Really walking." She stopped in her tracks, turning to face him with a smile that felt foreign at first. But it quickly grew, the warmth in her chest spreading outwards. "No," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not just walking. I'm living." The room was still, as if the world had momentarily stopped, waiting for the next move. Elara stood tall, feeling the full weight of her body, her mind, and her choices. She was no longer the woman who had been trapped in a wheelchair. She was something new. Something stronger. But just as she thought she had mastered the technology, a voice in the back of her mind whispered, this is only the beginning. The robotic legs, once a symbol of hope, had now become a test of her will. There would be more struggles ahead. More moments where the technology might fight back. But Elara was ready. She had faced the worst, and now she was ready to face whatever came next, because she knew one thing for sure. She was in control.